It's indeed my pleasure to welcome India's former Finance Minister, Mr. Yashwant Sinha, a very keen observer of the Indian economy, the macroeconomic landscape, and of course, the big issue that's in focus today, the union budget. Thank you very much, sir, for being with us. Before I go headlong into the union budget, I just want to take a quick detour and talk to you about the big data that's out today, not officially reported. In fact, the conjecturing is it's not being reported because the data is bad, but reports now seem to suggest that unemployment rate in India in 2017-18 is at a 45-year high. The last time we saw unemployment this high was in 1972-73. I think it's well past some of our living lives. 6.1% unemployment. How bad is this for an economy that claims to be the fastest growing in the world?
It is extremely bad. And that perhaps is the reason that the government is not allowing this data to come out officially. I have been saying, Supriya, for some time now, that government statistics cannot be believed anymore because we are aware of any number of instances, including, for instance, the back data series on GDP growth, which was released only after being dressed up, after being manipulated. So none of the data being released by the government has any credibility now because the government has been interfering with the data, manipulating data. And this is the latest example of it. Everyone is aware on the basis of anecdotal evidence that both demonetization and GST played havoc with existing employment. You know, existing employment. Why do you think these people have had to raise the Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme budget to 63,000 crore rupees per year? Only because the centers of economic activity all over the country, they have been destroyed. And the people who used to work there have gone back, especially from the poorer states of Bihar, Jharkhand, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh.
Precisely. No, you make an important point about the data credibility, and I think the conjecturing, the fact that NSO, and the National Statistical Commission has seen the slew of resignations that it has, it's now just left with two bureaucrats who are perhaps government servants and need to be there. The reason why I began with asking you that question is there any nuanced way to look at this data? Is it perhaps a function of that more people are looking into this, but the counter argument to that is that the LFPR, which is the labor force participation rate, since 2004 has been consistently going down. It was 39.5% in 2011-12. It's actually gone down to 36.9 in 2017-18. How do you explain that? Why are less people looking for work in India when we are perhaps going to be the youngest nation in the world?
Yeah, one reason which is offered for this is that people are, more people are getting educated. They are joining educational institutions. They are going to skilling centers. They are looking for not only employment, but quality employment, and there is a constant need for them to improve themselves. So that is the reason why perhaps there are more younger people in educational institutions and the skilling centers than out in the job market seeking jobs. They will at some point of time, when the cycle completes itself, they will start seeking jobs. The point to be noted is that despite the labor participation rate going down, the unemployment rate is going up.
That's right.
Which means that we are not.
The situation is actually a little more worse than.
Yes, we are not able to cater to the needs of lesser number of people seeking jobs.
The joblessness for rural male youth between 15 to 29 was at 5% in fiscal year 12. That has gone up to 17.4% in fiscal year 18. Add to that the rural stress there already is. What can the budget possibly do to move the needle on jobs?
Not this budget. This budget cannot do anything because the term of this government or the mandate of this government is coming to an end over the next 3 months. So a government whose term and whose mandate is coming to an end has no business dealing with the future. And the established constitutional practice is that they will only present a vote on account and seek 3 months or 4 months expenditure sanction from Parliament.
But that's precedent. Nothing legally binds them to not be able to do something.
This is the argument that is being advanced by the government. The conventions of the Constitution, Supriya, are as important and as valid, as sacrosanct as the written word of the Constitution. And if we violate a constitutional convention, we cannot say, no, there is not written. It's evolved over last 7 decades in our country. The entire British system works on the basis of conventions. There is no written constitution. So conventions cannot be treated in a cavalier fashion like this and say that there is no written word.
Can the budget incentivize job creation? And do you believe that the key to a solution here is going to be, whether it is this budget or the next, the policy making has to incentivize organized jobs, formal sector jobs, and for that, will it need to incentivize job making by private sector? The government can't be creating the jobs that is required for a country like ours.
I was asked this question by another interviewer, and I said, before we look at the possibility of job or employment creation, let's look at the amount of work which we have to do in this country. We have to build thousands of kilometers of national highway. We have to build lakhs of kilometers of rural roads. We have to construct crores and crores of houses. Then there are pending schemes like the Sagarmala, which is the parallel in the sea for the National Highway Program. Then we have the linking of rivers to be done. Then we have to set up so many new townships, as China has done, where people will move from the village only a short distance and start living in better surroundings in towns, where they will find employment opportunities also. So there is so much work to do that if only this country started doing that work, we'll have enough employment opportunities. And I like to tell you that recently there was a report in the media about employment generation and GDP growth.
That's
the
right.
connection between the two.
Yes.
And you will find that they started from 72 and took a 5-year period.
True.
That the Vajpayee years of 99-2004 were the best. We were not the best as far as growth rate was concerned.
But the employment generation was high.
Yeah.
Because there was a lot of economic activity that's happening. Are you, though, in some sense relieved that as far as agriculture is concerned, nobody is now talking about a blanket loan waiver, which was a plain Jane sort of a thing to go to? People are at least now beginning to talk about an agri relief package, which is perhaps going to be more comprehensive, interest-free loans and all of that. Is there perhaps a more nuanced way that agriculture is at least being talked about? I don't know what the budget will eventually do, but is that some sort of
agriculture is clearly in focus.
That's
because
right.
of so much agrarian distress that is taking place in our agriculture and rural areas. And the reason for that is very obvious, because agricultural prices in the market have crashed and the farmer is not getting adequate prices for his produce. So something has to be done. And I'm very happy that more and more people are talking about some kind of a universal basic income or income support scheme for the farmers. So much more important than loan waiver, to my mind, is the issue of guaranteeing an income for the farmer, which will resolve this conflict between the producer of the farmer who is the producer and the consumer, that is the whole society. This is the only way in which that conflict can be removed.
The estimated cost to that entire process could be about 1.5 to 2.5 lakh crore rupees. Do we have the fiscal space to do so? I'm not one of those who believes that the moment you talk about farmers, you bring out the fiscal rule book, and when it's about everybody else, you don't. But even then, do we have the fiscal space to do something like this?
I believe we have.
Why do you say
I had
so?
made my own calculations in a piece which I wrote on this. And I said that as far as the assured income scheme is concerned, we should cover only the smaller and the marginal farmer. The big farmers above 5 acres will take care of themselves, and they take advantage of the MSP and all that. And my calculation showed that we'll need 2 lakh crore rupees every year. And if we divided it in some proportion between the states and the center, maybe the center's liability will be less than 1% of the GDP, 1,40,000 crore, 1,30,000 crore. And we have a budget this year of 24 lakh, in excess of 24 lakh crore. So surely we can find
some space for
some space for this. Then I also said that because of its multiplier effect on productivity and other things, even if it led to a temporary increase in the fiscal deficit, we should go along with it.
So you're not somebody who's obsessed about 3.3%?
No. Why should we be obsessed about 3.3%?
Fair point.
I brought about the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Bill, and look at what has happened to the targets in the FRBM Act.
We are way behind targets to be met. But the reason why I also asked you that question is that there is a lot of speculation out there that this could be on the lines of the Raitu Bandhu that Telangana does, or the Kalia scheme. What do you believe is a pan-India solution? Because an assured income, and just for the benefit of markets, I'm going to repeat something that you've written and others have said, an assured income also puts the rural economy into motion, which is good for companies, which is good for the larger investment consumption cycle and all of that. But which of these two schemes do you believe is going to be uniquely possible pan-India? What is the solution there?
No, the solution is that we should take into account the Rayat Bandhu scheme of Telangana, the Kalia scheme of Orissa, I believe Jharkhand also has done something, and then prepare a scheme for the whole country, learning from the experience of these state schemes. And I'm sure it can be done. It is not something which is not possible, either fiscally or administratively. And now with kind of technology that we have, money can go straight into the farmer's account.
Do you believe the budget or policy making can make an intervention on that count?
No, the budget can only talk about it. The detailed scheme will have to be worked out separately in consultation with the state governments. And let me also tell you here, Supriya, that this is one part of the solution for the agrarian distress. I have also pleaded strongly for removing all restriction on trade in agricultural produce.
Agri exports and all of that.
Including exports. And except in emergencies and all that. So that the farmer can increase his income from selling in the best market possible and securing the best price.
But do you believe that's politically possible? Because every policy making that has happened around agriculture has been very consumer focused and not farmer focused. And you've got to blame governments across the board for that. Can that mindset change? That
mindset will have to change. And as I said, what has bothered the governments in the past? This conflict of interest between the consumer and the producer. And the best way is to fiscally intervene in the situation, so that the consumer is not burdened with increase in prices.
Do we have the infrastructure for this rural, for this agri produce that's happening? And does the focus need to move away from just the irrigation schemes and Fasal Bima Yojana and all of that to really putting rural infrastructure in place? And this will perhaps also take care of pricing and all of that over the long term.
Yeah. You are
the cold chains, the godowns and things like that.
Yes. I mean, all kinds of storage space must be created, because we have lots of perishables. I mean, you can't keep onions, for instance, in a cold storage. You need a special kind of storage facility for onions. So that is the kind of approach that we need. And we also, at the same time, must encourage agri processing.
That needs to go hand in hand.
That must go hand in hand. In fact, I had suggested in that piece which I had written that Mudra Yojana should have a special window for those small entrepreneurs who are interested in agri processing business.
Is income free loan, or is there a complete review that's required for agri credit per se? And what would your prescription be?
I think that's exactly what I had tried to do through this Kisan Credit Card. That it need not be a seasonal kind of a thing. The farmer is assured of monetary support from the institutions through the Kisan Credit Card. And whenever he needs that money, he can just go to the shop, buy whatever he needs, and show his card, and this will be charged to the bank. This is how the system should operate. And I have strongly pleaded that every farmer household should be supplied with a Kisan Credit Card and linked to some financial institution or the other.
Is universal basic income or minimum income guarantee, with whatever name you call it, an answer to some of our woes? And do you also believe there is political acceptance that something like this is required, because the kind of jobs we need and the number of jobs we need are perhaps not going to be created?
You know, the financial burden of a universal income support scheme or assured income scheme will be very huge. I have seen calculations running up to 7 lakh crore. Now that is clearly not affordable. Therefore, let's make a beginning. My suggestion is, let us make a beginning with the farmers of this country. And at the same time, through our economic policies, we should ensure that we create large employment opportunities, so that some of this sting is taken out from the current situation. The time for a universal basic income scheme will come. Its time will come, but perhaps it is not now.
There are many out there who believe that the government will do all it takes to meet 3.3%, and slashing expenditure perhaps is going to be the fallout of that. A, what is that going to mean for economic activity, which is still extremely weak, and it's all on account of public exchequer? And B, in terms of revenue, the revenue from GST is still extremely wobbly. So there isn't a very stable revenue stream to turn to just yet.
You're absolutely right. And therefore, what the government is doing is not honestly approaching this problem. They're indulging in a sleight of hand. They are postponing expenditure to the next year.
Yeah, subsidies could be rolled over and things like that.
That is one. The second is they're just not paying the bills. Their bills are not being paid. And the example which is given to me whenever I travel is that scheduled castes and scheduled tribe students have not received their scholarships for even 2 years, and it's 7,000-8,000 crore rupees which is just pending. So anything which is being done through the states needs a utilization certificate. If the utilization certificate doesn't come, the government says, no, we'll not pay. Then if they deliberately find some fault with the utilization certificate, then it creates a situation where they need not pay. So this is how expenditure management is taking place. And I am quite sure that the government which will come into office after these elections will have its hands full paying the previous bills.
Full and tight perhaps. But I think the one question that I want to ask you is, like, well, you don't believe that we should obsess so much over 3.3%. People will watch that number and people will see what sort of fiscal slippages happen. Even if they make it to 3.3%, with the means that you say, isn't the quality of the deficit going to be important? And will markets then make their peace with a populist versus what, Mr. Jaitley said, a rational approach to budget making?
I don't know what he meant by a rational approach, but the markets see through the sleight of hand that the government might indulge in, and therefore, they will behave accordingly. I don't think that 3.3 is so sacrosanct that it cannot become 3.4. There was a time during the UPA period when they allowed it to go to above 6%. So fiscal deficit consideration is good, but our experience will show that the country has not come to a grinding halt, even when fiscal deficit has gone up to.
But sir, it has
6%.
had implications on the currency, on inflation, and all of that.
Yeah, it has. There no doubt.
But you believe that trade-off is still better than constraining a budget?
When I was finance minister, I was being accused of being a fiscal fundamentalist. But I accepted that criticism because I thought it was a healthy criticism. But I am making a distinction here between the revenue deficit
and the fiscal
deficit. And it is the revenue deficit at which we must look and try and control. But if we are borrowing from the market to spend on capital projects, then we'll get the money to return that loan.
But I think talking about revenue deficit, there's one revenue stream that I specifically want to speak to you about because it happened under your watch in a big way and hasn't really taken off in NDA 2, which is privatization or divestment. Yes, you know, we got to a 1 lakh crore mark last year with an ONGC, HPCL kind of a deal. We are now talking about an REC, PFC and a Bank of Baroda sort of a merger. But is that real divestment? I mean,
No,
is that real
not.
stake sale?
No.
And should the government be sitting on Sooty and not sell it when it needs to for revenue? What is your take on that?
There are two things. One is that as far as inter-company, cross holdings or this thing is concerned, I had tried it when ONGC bought some shares in the IOC, and I was roundly condemned for doing this. Now, this government is getting away with blue murder. And with a media which is very friendly, nobody is even talking about it, much less criticize it. This is not disinvestment or privatization. The second is they are forcing companies to go for buyback of shares. They are raiding the companies for their cash reserves. They are doing all kinds of things to shore up their revenues. And that is not permissible. It should not be permissible. The public sector must be left alone and should look after its own interest.
But what about stake sales? I mean, you know, 80,000 crore is the target. I'm presuming we'll get there somehow by these mergers that will happen. What about the Sooty stake? Should the government sit on...
Sooty stake is like a reserve, reserve money with the government. And when you go to sell it in the market, you'll have to look at the market conditions. And governments have generally refrained from doing so far because, one, they don't want to delve into their reserves, and the second is that you can't really time the market. So anytime you go and sell those very blue chip...
That's true, blue chip companies.
Companies. Somebody will stand up and say, you know, you sold it at a much lower price.
So then does that put the government in a bind to what to do with these shares? Isn't this a better time than any to sell that stake?
No, how is it a better time? I mean, perhaps the better time will come when our stock market goes up to 30,000 or whatever.
Fair point. Very quickly, sir, one question that I want to ask you is that while there has been GST that has been rolled on the indirect tax front, not much progress has been made on the direct tax front. The Arvind Modi committee reports have not been adopted, endorsed or espoused just yet. In some way, there is a middle class that's very vocal and they're also looking at some sort of a respite in this budget. I wonder if there's the fiscal room or space for that to come. But in some way, has the government missed the bus on simplifying the direct tax structure as well?
Yes, it has.
Which perhaps would have been easier to do.
Absolutely. You know the history that Chidambaram started it. Then Pranab Mukherjee actually introduced the Direct Taxes Code Bill in Parliament.
Yes.
I was chairperson with the Standing Committee on Finance. The bill came to us. We looked at the bill and made suggestions which were, which came in for high praise even from the media. And I had hoped that UPA 2 will actually enact the Direct Taxes Code Bill. That didn't happen. When this government came into office, the Finance Minister said there is no need for the Direct Taxes Code anymore. We'll do whatever little amendments we need through the Finance Bill. That's how it continued until the Prime Minister intervened and said we need amendment or a new Income Tax Act. And that's when all the flurry of activity started. But it's too late now. They have not been able to do it. But I believe that we must have a new Income Tax Act.
Do you believe there is scope for any sort of respite for the middle class that pays its taxes?
We had in fact in that report on behalf of the Standing Committee that I had submitted to Parliament, there we had suggested that as far as tax exemption, in personal income tax exemption was concerned, we should raise it to 5 lakhs. And I had also said that then it should be linked to the cost of living index.
Fair point. Two last questions, sir, and one of them has to be, we can't do a fiscal policy decision and not talk about its impact on monetary policy. People believe inflation is extremely benign, factory output has crashed in some sense, and so the stage is set for a monetary policy loosening rate cut. How crucial an input is the budget going to be on the monetary policy front?
Not this budget, because it's not a full budget. I hope it will not be a full budget. It is only a vote on account for a few months, expenditure sanctioned by Parliament. So this is not a game changer budget. But you know, there is the whole arena of fiscal policy which is already there. And inflation has crashed, come down sharply, because the economy is not moving. And therefore, in order to make the economy move, there is a need for a interest rate cut. I am personally convinced that Reserve Bank of India Monetary Policy Committee should bring down the interest rate by 50 basis points at least.
So a quick last question. The big event for the markets is the budget. It's also the big risk factor. This is perhaps going to be over come tomorrow. What happens from here on? Does election become the biggest deciding factor in which way the markets move? What happens to the larger economy and the macroeconomic landscape?
From my personal experience, let me tell you, this country has not faced a bigger crisis than in 1991. Did anybody bother about what the crisis was except the poor finance minister and the poor prime minister? Everyone went into the election mode and nobody bothered about it. I mean, even those people who knew things better threw the country into the election mode. So when after this session of Parliament is over, everyone, the whole country, the people, the politicians will be in the election mode, and you will hear of nothing except election news.
And a very, very ugly electoral discourse, if I may. On that note, sir, thank you very much for speaking to us.
Thank you.